Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today's update with FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell. The purpose of today's call is to discuss FEMA's recovery efforts to Hurricanes Milton and Helene. This is Michael Hart with FEMA's Region 4 Press Office, and I'll be your host today. Administrator Criswell's remarks will be on the record. She'll begin shortly with opening remarks. Then we'll open the floor for questions. Please limit your questions to one, with one follow-up if necessary. Also, please state your full name and outlet before asking your question. And lastly, please wait until I have called on you before asking your question. And with that, I'll now turn it over to Administrator Criswell.
Thank you, Michael, and good afternoon, everybody. Today, I'm here in Virginia, where I had an opportunity earlier to sit down with Governor Youngkin and hear directly from him about some of the concerns that he has and his priorities for the continued recovery for all of the communities in this part of Virginia that were impacted by Hurricane Helene. I've also had a chance to talk with some of the survivors, as well as the mayor of Damascus, which is where I'm at right now, as she described the path of destruction that the waters took as they came through, some of which maybe you can see behind me right now. While I've been here, I've been able to visit with 2 of our disaster recovery centers. We have 5 total in the state. We'll be putting up more in the impacted counties, and had an opportunity to talk with my staff, as well as meet with staff from other agencies like the SBA, the Virginia Employment Commission, the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, as well as the Virginia Department of Health. And together, they're able to form a team that can provide that one-stop shop for the people that have been impacted by this storm. Yesterday, we had an opportunity to talk about our individual assistance program, but as we all know, that is just one part of the recovery programs that we provide. Getting people back on their feet is a critical part, but there's more to it, and we need to make sure that our communities have the resilient infrastructure that they need as they continue to recover from these storms. So today I'm going to give you an update on the work that we are doing through our public assistance program to support local and state governments during the recovery process. So far, we've obligated over $1.1 billion in public assistance alone for both Hurricanes Helene and Hurricane Milton. Currently, this funding is primarily being utilized for debris clearance, as well as support for emergency protective measures that were taken in the immediate aftermath of both storms. Emergency protective measures are things like costs incurred by first responders to do the incredible work that they did to help save lives and rescue those that were in harm's way. But this is just what we're doing in this very immediate term. In the medium and the long term, we're going to continue to support and reimburse the state and the local governments for their permanent recovery projects as they continue on their road to recovery. Right now, what my team and I have been working on is how we can provide the maximum flexibility we have within our authorities to best meet the unique circumstances and situations that each of these communities are going to face. Just to give you an example, for the last few weeks, I've traveled through Western North Carolina, and assessing the damage, I had a chance to see the number of private bridges that had been impacted by this storm. These are private bridges that connect these remote mountain communities with the main thoroughfares to get into the cities. Private bridges like these, they're not typically eligible under our programs, especially under the public assistance program. But because of how critical they are to these families to help make sure that they remain connected with communities, we've created a joint task force with the state of North Carolina to figure out how we can maximize the flexibilities to help meet their unique needs. Another thing that we also know is that for some of these smaller communities that haven't experienced a lot of disasters, cash flow in these rural communities can be a real struggle. And so it can really slow down their recovery process. So we're working with each of them individually to make sure we can expedite some of the project worksheets, enabling us to get money faster into their hands to help reimburse them for much of their early expenses that they incurred. And so an example of this is if you're a small fire department that has been paying overtime for all of your firefighters, FEMA is able to help pay those excess costs almost immediately through an expedited project worksheet. We know that this is going to help communities continue on their recovery process. And because we also want to have the conversation about how we can help these communities build back more resiliently, we recently updated our public assistance policy to increase the federal cost share when mitigation is included in the permanent repair of these projects. And now states, tribal nations, territories, and certain nonprofits have the opportunity to receive up to 85% of a federal cost share if they complete eligible hazard mitigation proposals within their permanent recovery projects. Our normal cost share is 75%, so this gives them an additional 10% of federal cost share to do the important resilience work as they rebuild. But we've already obligated over $5.4 billion across all of the 6 states impacted by Helene and Milton. And these spending levels, they are historic, and they are currently outpacing other events that we've had, including Hurricane Ian a few years ago. And I know I get the question from many of you all the time, what is the current balance of our disaster relief fund? And as of my report yesterday afternoon, the balance was at $8.1 billion. So we're still spending quite a bit every day to help these communities in these immediate days after the storm. We are going to continue to prioritize the life-saving and the life-sustaining measures, and we'll continue to provide individual assistance directly to the people impacted. We're going to continue to support the debris removal, as well as the emergency protective measures that these communities are still engaged in. But as I talked before about the long-term permanent rebuild, if we have to go into immediate needs funding to continue this work, to continue the life-saving work, we're going to have to pause reimbursements for the long-term permanent infrastructure projects. Now, what that means is we'll continue to work with our states and our local partners to process the paperwork for all of the expenses that they have achieved. But without a supplemental, I will not be able to reimburse them for the costs that they incurred. And for some of our smaller communities, frankly, this is a real struggle for them. And it can severely impact their budgets and their ability to move on to other recovery projects. So I want to thank you for your continued attention towards the Disaster Relief Fund and what our balance is. We continue to monitor it very closely. And it's really important because, especially as we look ahead to not just a complicated recovery, but we also have an opportunity to build resilient infrastructure in communities across the Southeast. And so with the DRF, and once we get a supplemental, we'll be able to really put some incredible resilience measures into the recovery projects across all of these states. So again, thank you for your interest in reporting on this ongoing work. And with that, Michael, I'll turn it over to you for any questions anybody has.
All right. Thank you, Administrator, for those remarks and information. We'll now open the floor for questions. And right now, I do not see anyone with their hand up. Yes, I do. Jonathan Matisse. Jonathan, over to you.
Hey, Administrator, this is Jonathan Matisse with the Associated Press. I wanted to follow up with you on the threats from the harassment from armed people in a remote part of East Tennessee. Is there any more information you can share on what the circumstances were there, and any information you could share on what FEMA is doing to help protect workers in Tennessee, given that situation and the situation in North Carolina that preceded it?
Yeah, again, Jonathan, I think what we're seeing is a lot of still some misinformation that is on social media that is causing people to approach some of our staff in the field and maybe have some verbal aggression towards them, or just creating uncomfortable situations. What happened in Tennessee was not one of those situations where I needed to pull my staff back, but we're taking all of these situations seriously. And we have worked very closely with all of our state partners, especially in North Carolina, Tennessee, South Carolina, to make sure that we are working with local law enforcement to provide the safest environment and harassment-free environment for our staff. And so it's not just potential threats, but it's just harassment as well. And we want to make sure that our teams can do the important work that they need to do to get into communities, to talk to people that have been impacted by these disasters, to help them register and get the assistance they need. It is my priority. We'll continue to make sure that we're looking out for their safety.
Thank you. And on a broader scale, is this harassment sort of threat environment, has that increased with this recent series of weather events, or is this more of an isolated occurrence?
Yeah, I don't know if we have data that would suggest that it is increased. I would say that we're probably more focused on exactly what's happening out there and following it very closely. Obviously, we have people that are in the field across all of the disasters that we have supported in these individual assistance days. And so I don't know if I have data that say it's increased, but I know that we are much more focused on it just because of the amount of misinformation that was out there.
All right, as a reminder, please raise your hand if you have a question and state your full name and outlet before asking your question. Let's go over to Danielle.
Hello, my name is Danielle Pryor. I'm with the NPR station in Orlando, Florida. I was wondering if you've seen any of that threatening behavior here in Florida at all towards FEMA workers.
I can have my team get back with you. I think that I did have one report of some harassment. I wouldn't necessarily call it threatening, but we'll certainly be able to follow up with you.
Thank you.
All right, over to Justin.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Justin.
Thanks. Hey, Justin, Doubleday, Federal News Network. Just quick question on staffing. As you look at your requirements to kind of staff these disasters for the long term and maintain kind of obviously some folks in case there are more events, in the near future, are you looking at any strategies over the coming months, the surge capacity force, the volunteer force, things like that to kind of backfill and make sure you have adequate staff?
Yeah, absolutely, Justin. In fact, we've already employed those layered strategies, layered staffing approaches. In fact, today I was at one of our DRCs that had a member from the civilian side of the Department of Defense that was part of the volunteer force that came in, and we provided him just-in-time training. I was at a DRC the other day that had staff from CISA and from the State Department. And so we're seeing across all of our DRCs, as well as our disaster survivor assistance teams, not just FEMA employees, but across the federal government. We continue to bring in more personnel from all of the federal government that want to volunteer and be part of this. So we can sustain this for the time it's going to take to make sure that everybody's had an opportunity to register for assistance, to visit one of our disaster recovery centers, until we know that we've gotten them all of the information that they need. And so it's a really critical part of how we staff these disasters.
Thank you.
All right, let's pause and see if anyone has any other questions. Give it another pause or two here. All right, well, that looks like it does. That closes out our call for today. Thanks to everyone for joining the call. And of course, if you have any additional questions, please send them to the FEMA headquarters press office at FEMA-news-desk@fema.dhs.gov. This concludes today's call. All parties are free to drop. Thanks.